Okay, so this is lesson 7C. So why did I divide this up? Because the way that the classes were stacked a little bit, um, some of you were actually already through the last lesson yesterday, so just figured I'd divide it up so you don't have to watch the whole thing if you're unsure or you were in class. So just a quick recap. The AFL decided that on May the 3rd of 1886, they would have a one-day walkout across the country of every labor union, if possible, in order to to advocate, that's what that is, to work for or to push for an 8-hour workday. On May the 3rd in Chicago, in front of the McCormick Reaper factory, where there was already a strike going on, a group of anarchists agitated the strikers to try to attack police who were escorting out replacement workers, strikebreakers. The result was the police shooting as they were being charged by a group of basically a mob, and 2 people died. The same day on May the 3rd, right after that happened, all of a sudden, posters began appearing all over Chicago, especially in immigrant neighborhoods, calling for revenge. Now, I'm not going to go to the full extent that I did in class, but you can see here, if you need to, you can pause and look at this a little bit. But revenge! Working men to arms! Okay, they're not calling for people to show up, in short sleeves. They're telling people to get weapons. Your master sent out their bloodhounds, the police. They killed 6, actually 2, of your brothers at McCormick's this afternoon. They killed the poor wretches because they, like you, had the courage to disobey the supreme will of your bosses. They killed them because they dared ask for the shortening of the hours of toil. They killed them to show you, free American citizens, in quotes, that you must be satisfied and content with whatever your bosses condescend to allow you, or you will get killed. You have for years endured the most abject humiliations. You have for years suffered unmeasurable inequities. You have worked yourself to death. You have endured the pangs of want and hunger. Your children you have sacrificed to the factory lords. In short, you have been miserable and obedient slave all these years. Why? To satisfy the insatiable greed, to fill the coffers of your lazy, thieving master. When you ask them now to lessen your burden, he sends his bloodhounds out to shoot you, kill you. If you are men, if you are the sons of your grandsires who have shed their blood to free you, then you will rise in your might, Hercules, and destroy the hideous monster that seeks to destroy you. To arms, we call you, to arms, your brothers. And down here, the German version, which looks even angrier. The next day, May the 4th, may the 4th be with you, well, it was then, this poster appears. Oops, sorry, wrong one. We just had that one. This poster appears. Attention, working men. Great mass meeting tonight at 7:30 o'clock at the Haymarket, Randolph Street between Des Plaines and Halstead. Good speakers will be present to denounce the latest atrocious act of the police, the shooting of our fellow workmen yesterday afternoon, the executive committee. Now, let's look at the quick obvious here. English probably isn't their first language, so some of this rather sus language choice, like mass meeting tonight at 7:30 o'clock. Good speakers will be present as opposed to bad speakers or mediocre speakers. They call for a rally to protest what happened. Now, what happens next is slightly sketchy. So, it's obvious that the anarchists wanted there to be violence, and there was. It's obvious that they were looking for the police to kill people, which they did, even if that number wasn't exactly correct. They killed people. On May the 4th, in sort of spur of the moment meeting at 7:30 in the evening at the Haymarket Square, Conservative estimates say that 600 people showed up. The real numbers, according to eyewitnesses and people involved, was probably closer to about 3,000. What happens next? Really nothing. Um, the anarchists get up and give fiery speeches while people are walking their dogs in the neighborhood or whatever, or bringing home groceries, or just out for an evening stroll. The police are there to make sure that things don't get out of hand. But for over an hour, the anarchists are given their constitutional right to peaceably assemble and petition for a redress of grievances. First Amendment, baby. At the end of an hour or so, the police are like, okay, you guys are done. Please go home peacefully. Everybody starts to leave. No fuss or muss. Until some random whack job throws this thing. Yeah, it looks like something you made in your basement, because quite frankly it was. This is a homemade bomb. Notice the screw holding the two halves of the bomb together and the long fuse. It looks like something Bugs Bunny would chuck at somebody, man. I'm serious. Somebody throws that device in the middle of a group of policemen. It explodes. 7 policemen are killed. The police open fire. The anarchists, who have all shown up heavily armed, return fire. There's a full-scale firefight in downtown Chicago on May the 4th. When the smoke clears, in addition to the 7 dead policemen, 60 more are wounded. And over 50 civilians and attendees at the rally are either killed or wounded. On May the 5th, the Chicago police go to work. Now, there's a couple things you have to keep in mind here. Thing number one, in rounding up the anarchists, they knew who the anarchists were. We talked about this. The anarchists made no real secret of who they were. It was one of the safest ways to hide, was hiding in plain sight. The problem is that police methods back in the day aren't like watching CSI now. There was no like crime scene analysis with incredible scientific evidence to back up their... No. The police kicked the door in, began beating your wife and children, pulling out guns, threatening everybody until you confessed or gave them information. Guess what? Lots of people just gave information and they threw other people under the bus. They round up at the end of it and put on trial 8 anarchists. Everybody knew what was going to happen. They were found guilty. 3 of them are given a life imprisonment sentence. 1 of them kills himself in prison as opposed to facing what the outcome was going to be. And 4 of them are publicly hanged. Now, the great irony of this is, while all 8 of these men were anarchists and probably did some shady stuff, none of them are the guy who chucked the bomb, and likely none of them actually even helped make the darn thing. The real bomb thrower left the country on the evening of May the 4th. He got on a train, went out to New York, took a boat back to Europe, where he lived La Vida Loca and the high life, being the guy who caused the Haymarket riot. And he sort of got anarchists in Europe who like worshipped him and thought he was amazing to pay for stuff for him. Now, there's a semi, poetic justice ending, which is he's at a cafe one day in, I think, Italy, and somebody walked up to him in the middle of lunch and shot him. So at least he had a last meal. The real tragedy of this whole occurrence, aside from the people who were killed and, the people who were injured, the sketchy, really bad way that the police handled the entire incident resulted in a monument being built that's still there today in the Haymarket in downtown Chicago to the 8 martyrs of the Haymarket riot. These people were anarchists. They were horrible people, and yet they're made to look like the victim. Because Marxists are really good at controlling media narrative. Karl Marx himself was a journalist. And they're very good at managing perception and how people take what's going on. These 8 anarchists who were guilty of crime, who were guilty of literally a conspiracy to overthrow the government and, overthrow working conditions in America in their great battle against the bourgeois. These 8 men became regarded as heroes. There's a monument built to them. The anarchists are the ones who started the incident on May the 3rd and the incident on May the 4th. The police are made to look like the bad guys. Why? Because of the really poor way they handled the trial and the gathering of suspects. It's a good lesson to look at. And then oftentimes the people who are portrayed as victims are themselves the perpetrators of the problems. So let's sort of wrap up this portion of the unit. You go back to this. Unions in America started because of legitimate issues and good intentions. The issues of child labor, the issues of unsafe working conditions, long hours, low pay, all of which needed to be addressed. But instead of waiting for the gradual process of development and working towards this, unions were very easily drawn in to Marxist propaganda. Marxism promises equality and equity. Now remember, there's a couple of different ways you can make people equal. In a room full of people, in a room full of 20 people, 5 of them, or 10 of them, half of them have $10, half of them have none. If everybody who's got $10 gives the other people $5, everybody's suddenly equal. Or if the government simply takes away the money from those who have and nobody has anything, you're all equal too, equally poor. The real issue that unions are a part of is the question of whose job is it to promote the general welfare? Is it the government's job to be charity? Because if it is, and remember the word public is just another word for government, that needs big government to oversee the charitable giving. It needs high taxes, and the government decides what's fair and what isn't, what equality means. If it's private, it's done so because it's a moral obligation. You're not being forced to do it. And the code or the template for this is a document called The Gospel of Wealth, written by Andrew Carnegie. And we'll detail that tomorrow and talk about it a little bit more. So it's an issue of whether it's a public matter, government matter, or a private matter, personal citizens. Ideally, the way that things should work is business and labor both have to realize they need each other. Workers need jobs, and they need to earn the money that they have. Businesses and owners need employees, otherwise their stuff's not getting made. They can both win if they merely cooperate and penetrate, the resistance on both sides. It requires compromise and the acceptance of the fact that we're not going to get all that we want, but also the realization that happy workers means better business and more productivity and more profits. So this is where we're going to stop for today. We'll pick this up tomorrow or the next lesson where we're going to look at the last part of Unit 1, where it's a return to the bearded weirdos and life in the States while labor and business go at it mano a mano. Peace and love.